It's been pointed out to me. I have this notebook, and if the question is, "Are you for sale?" I can say that in this notebook are plans for my memorial service, which were written, I think, during a run-through of a show rather than taking notes, and lyrics for a song that include you start to obsess or guess that your parents are psychotic, and then with all the stress that your parents give you, you get from chess what your parents never gave you. I have no idea what song that was from, but it says something about, well, I am for sale. So tonight, here we go. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlights and dewdrops are waiting for thee. So 150 years ago this week, that song was published. This week, 150 years ago, the same week that the Confederacy chose the Stars and Bars officially as its flag and that Sherman planned his march to the sea. That song was published and made a lot of people a lot of money, not its author. He, 2 months earlier, had died a few blocks from here on the Bowery. Stephen Foster died. He was drunk in basically an SRO on the Bowery. He was shaving himself. He had sold his clothes. It's a terrible story. He was shaving and fell and broke the sink, and that shattered and ripped open his forehead, and then he went to the hospital and died. In his pocket were 37 cents and a note that said, dear souls and gentle hearts, which no one knows if that is a lyric he was planning to work on or what that might be. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to try to make money as a songwriter in America. So, 1846, Stephen Foster, 14 years earlier, basically invented the pop song. If by pop song you want, the American pop song, if by American pop song you want to say the song that is planned to make you money, the song that you write to sell. He is living in Cincinnati. He is from Pittsburgh, and he writes a song that is premiered by well, let's be honest about the 19th century, by a blackface quartet of white people singing in blackface at an ice cream saloon in Pittsburgh. The song goes something like this. I've come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I'm going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me, for I've come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. So, I don't know if many of you know the second verse of that. I jumped aboard the telegraph and traveled down the river. The electric current got right up and killed 500, the N-word. So that song is written by a white guy from Pittsburgh living in Cincinnati. It's in the voice of a black man. It's 1846, who is somehow traveling from Alabama with a banjo to Louisiana. If you think about 1846 in Alabama, I don't know who this man is, but he's a very brave man. It's in a dialect that Foster made up himself. We don't want to get into that. Sung by white people in blackface in Pittsburgh. Stephen Foster, most of our iconography of the South was basically invented by Stephen Foster. My old Kentucky home, the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home, way down upon the Suwannee River. Stephen Foster had never been to Florida, which is where the Suwannee River is. He had never been to Kentucky. He had never been to Alabama. He had been south of the Mason-Dixon line once for 3 days on a steamboat down the Mississippi for his honeymoon, which is to say that the iconography of the South that we know, that some people cherish, but certainly that we all live with, much of it was invented by a white guy from Pittsburgh who had never been there. The song is really complicated because it sounds something like Yankee Doodle. Definitely the tune derives in part, the Oh Susanna, derives in part from Yankee Doodle, derives in part from some of the blackface minstrel songs that were becoming incredibly popular, especially in the North. Sorry, anybody who likes to think of the North as a less complicated place. And it also sounds a bit like Dixie. which was written that same year and which later Foster claimed credit for, though the credit for Dixie is, I don't even want to get into that and talk this short. So you can look that one up. It's on Wikipedia and fantastic. So that's the tune. The lyrics, as I've said, are a white guy writing in the made-up voice of a black man in a state that the white guy had never been to, which is its own Michigas, as my grandmother would say. And the rhythm, well, the rhythm is this. Which, if you look up your history of 1846, there had been famines, most famously in Ireland, but everywhere, economic disasters, and a huge number of Central European and German immigrants came to America, bringing with them the first dance to sweep the nation, the polka. Oh, Susanna is a white man writing like a black man to a sort of minstrel, Yankee Doodle, military fife march parody tune to the rhythm of the polka. Which is to say that pop music in America has always been really complicated to talk about. The song, and when I say that pop music is music designed to sell, the song, before that, no song had sold in any record that we can find more than 5,000 pieces of sheet music. Oh, Susanna sells 100,000. Stephen Foster makes about $100 from this. Continuing a problem. So 1846, I'm just gonna leap forward with that one. 1846, another man is born in 1846. His name is George Washington Johnson. He is born a slave in Virginia, and somehow, no one knows how, 40 years later, he has made his way. So he is born the same year Oh Susanna is published. He makes his way to New York, where he sings at the ferry terminal on the south part of Manhattan, again, not far from here. He sings some songs, and he is known as that guy who whistles at the ferry terminal. By crazy coincidence or chance, or the world is strange, a enterprising guy who has gotten involved in this new technology called recording. We don't like to think how far back recording actually goes, but it does go back farther than we think, into the 19th century. Here's this 40-something-year-old ex-slave from Virginia singing at the ferry terminal. And because these early recordings, which were done on sort of wax cylinders, that's a whole other thing you can look up on Wikipedia, they didn't capture singing that well, they didn't capture most instruments that well, but they did capture whistling really well because it's pure and sort of cuts right through all the scratching and all that problem. So they heard this guy whistling, and they were like, you are gonna be a star. And so he, the first two hit records that how you decide this, but records that sold a few thousand copies that are known were of John Philip Sousa marches done by like the Marine Corps band. The third and fourth best-selling records of this very primitive recording were George Washington Johnson performing his hits, The Whistling Coon and The Laughing Coon. I apologize for the language I'm using. The problem with the 19th century is this is where we get to. That said, just as that is to me as important a moment as the publication of Oh Susanna in terms of these are the first hit songs. And no one has ever heard of this man, George Washington Johnson. We actually don't even know how he got from Virginia to New York. We do know that he died working on an elevator in Queens in a building. Even crazier is this recording, to make wax cylinder recordings, you could do about 6 at a time, which means we know he sold maybe over 25,000, maybe 30,000 copies of one, which means he recorded the Laughing Coon song 8,000 times, singing it over and over and over and over again. This song did not escape the attention of a man named Ernest Hogan, an African-American comedian who was talking to some publishers about how he wanted to write a hit song, and they said, this is what's selling. We need some sheet music like this. He had recently heard some of the ragtime music. This is in around 1890. He'd heard a song that might be by Scott Joplin. Again, very fuzzy. It goes like this. So ragtime means a lot of things. The derivation is really unclear, but one of the things it means that we don't like to talk about is it just means when people are talking about ragtime music, they're talking about blackface music. I'm sorry to, again, these words make me very uncomfortable to say, but that's just sort of a basic truth. It also means a kind of rhythm. It means a lot of things, but when you say this word, you partly mean blackface music. He had heard that song. It was called All Pimps Look Alike to Me. It didn't have any lyrics at that time, and the thing that had happened is, weirdly, ragtime was piano music, but it had not become songs. He changed the lyrics to write a song about a guy whose girl had left him for a richer guy, and it has a very funny verse if you can stand the lyrics, because the song is, when he rewrote it, it's called All Coons Look Alike to Me. The song sold 1 million copies. It's the first sheet music to sell 1 million copies. Again, a fairly watershed moment. This did not escape the attention of a bunch of music publishers, including Whitmark and Sons, M. Whitmark and Sons, which was really the first publishing group in New York. We're going to stay very close to right here in this room tonight. In New York, the first group publishing house to sell both white and black written music. They're called M. Whitmark and Sons, and this is wonderful because they were formed by 3 brothers, all of whom were under 18 when they formed it, and they needed their father's signature to incorporate. Which is to say that pop music, the future of pop music as of 1886 was decided by a bunch of 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, as it would be ever after. They moved their offices a few years later to West 28th Street, where a lot of other music publishers were moving their offices. And people would say the sound of pianos echoing in and out down that road sounded like a whole lot of tin pans being hit together. And then that block of 28th Street became known as Tin Pan Alley. It had, by 1900, the largest concentration of music publishers that anywhere on earth had or would ever know. They controlled the money, obviously, and by 1914, 100 years ago, a group was founded by a bunch of their, as it were, songwriters to try to get some of those royalties that they were hogging back to the songwriters. In fact, this was done in Stephen Foster's memory, evoking his legendary death penniless and alone in a tenement on the Bowery. A group of songwriters led by Irving Berlin founded ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. Irving Berlin, his first huge hit was a song that by 1927 was recorded by a woman who, and bear with me, this is going to take a little while to build up, back to 1846, the year that Oh Susanna was written and the year that George Washington Johnson, the first recording star that we have never heard of, was born. In 1846, another woman was born. Her name was Laura Owens. She was born in Alabama, like the man in Oh Susanna. She was named Laura Owens because she lived on the Owen plantation. So she was, in fact, Owens, with an apostrophe, which She married a man named Smith, and they moved to Chattanooga, finally, after many years. And very late, when she was almost 50, they had a daughter whose name was Bessie Smith, who would record one of the first million-selling records of the 20th century. Bessie Smith, in 1927, recorded a song by Irving Berlin called Alexander's Ragtime Band. It sold incredibly well. And in this song, there's, of course, a line, and if you care to hear that Swanee River played in ragtime, come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band, which to me brings it all together, because what she's saying, if you care to hear that 1846 Stephen Foster tune about a made-up Florida by a white guy who'd never been there, sung in the voice of a black man, maybe missing his plantation, played in ragtime, meaning played in blackface, like all those other songs that were hits. Well, then come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band, sung by Bessie Smith, who sang in the blues, the first time that black women sang as black women, not in blackface, not in any kind of made-up dialect, but as themselves. And you hear Bessie Smith's recording, and I wish I could play it for you here tonight, but go home and listen to it, because she wraps up the entire history of what of all those complications in pop music, in her rendition of this Irving Berlin song, which is a weird kind of tribute to Scott Joplin and a weird kind of tribute to Stephen Foster, in a kind of tribute or fuck you of her own. And I recommend it because it's a kind of antidote to the whole darn confusing, wonderful, beautiful, poisonous, bizarre history that we all share ourselves. So thank you very much. I hope you will go listen to Bessie Smith. And I'm going to go back to planning my memorial service.